Interested in moving in the positive? Looking for alternative conceptualizations? Tired of oversimplifications, distortions, and half-truths? Want to hear ideas of how to actually move the country forward? Of course you do. You're Northern Vibers. Welcome to Northern Vibe. Thanks very much for tuning in. If we've never met, I'm Matt Maloney. I'm the host and founder of Northern Vibe. Northern Vibe believes in elevating the obscure. We believe in exposing excellence. We believe in cultivating curiosity. We believe in acknowledging achievement and shining a light on uniqueness. We engage in open conversations with those who have hidden talents, abilities, and accomplishments. And tonight's guest is a very accomplished man. I'm thrilled to have him on board. We seek to understand interesting and informed people, to comprehend and appreciate motivation. So listen in, eavesdrop. Everyone wants to grow. Northern Vibe is itself growing, but we really need your help to keep up momentum. Please, it's a big deal for us. Our metrics matter. Like and share. Please follow Northern Vibe if you haven't already done so. And we're getting some really interesting locations where people are listening from. And a big hello to Sydney. No surprise, I suppose, considering where my guest is from. And we're getting some great suggestions from the comments page. So please keep them coming. Now, this includes suggestions for guests. If you're interested in coming on Northern Vibe, contact me through the Facebook page. Just send me a message. I'll be doing a very brief bio, but first, this week's mention in dispatches goes to Doctors Without Borders. Well, we've got two actually. Anthony got a little bit excited. He's got two mentions in dispatches that he wanted me to do. So the first one is Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières. That's their website. So if you just Google msf.org.au about us and get involved. So you can fundraise, gifts in wills, workplace giving. There's events, social media events. There's all sorts of things you can do. Now, the other community group that Anthony really wanted me to promote is Community First Development. Now, they're an Indigenous aimed community development organisation. Same sort of thing. Jump on there. If you just Google Community First Development, click on Get Involved, they'll tell you what to do. Now, Anthony's bio. Anthony is a Queenslander. He was born in Innisfail, but raised in Brisbane. He's lived the past 17 years in Sydney, the poor chap. My heart goes out to him. He's a researcher at the Institute for Positive Psychology and Education at Australian Catholic University in Sydney. His research interests are positive psychology, conceptualisation of mental health, well-being, and Aboriginal education, a broad and interesting spectrum, even if I do say so. He's an active social commenter on lots of issues, but including Aboriginals. And he's regularly asked for interviews on his opinion and to give his opinion in the popular media. He's a researcher, he's a commentator, he's a practicing psychologist. He regularly provides guest lectures to psychology students at university and other professional bodies about Aboriginal psychology. He's also assisted with the Queensland Police. I can tell you that he's helped educate us. Pretty impressive guy. Anthony, welcome. Thanks very much for coming on board.
Thank you, Matt, for having me.
No, mate, I'm going to get all fanboy. I've got one of the regular listeners. He kind of gets up me for getting all fanboy, but I can't kind of help it because one of the great things about Northern Vibe is I get to kind of talk to people, and it's just out of focus. But I've got your article right up there in my book. Your one of your spectator articles. The number is growing, so I've been really looking forward to this chat, and I'm getting quite a bit of we're getting quite a bit of love. So I know other people as well. But look, first, tell me about you.
Okay, well, just to catch on to something you said earlier, I'm not from Sydney. I'm in Sydney. I'm from Queensland, which you corrected later on, but this is where my body has been for 17 years, and it served me well. But yes, I'm a Queenslander. Haven't been up there for a little while because of COVID and that sort of thing. Looking forward to getting back up there. So, what do you want to know? My background, how I got to where I am today?
Well, yeah, mate, look, well, actually tell us about your expertise.
Okay. Some people wouldn't call them expertise. Let's call them passions or areas of interest, I guess. Psychology, health and well-being. I'm very aware of, certainly we live in hard times, and, a lot of people have a lot of things to cope with. And, you know, some people do better than others, and some people need a helping hand, and that's fine. But I think we need to be careful of not just medicalizing or pathologizing every problem a person has, every mental health problem has. You know, even if it's serious, you know, they get very depressed or whatever, you shouldn't be quick to pathologize that, but rather recognize that it's a human condition and the person needs, you know, rest, love and care and that sort of thing. Let's not medicalize and pathologize things. Let's humanize these things and work with one another. And that's certainly what I take with me into the consulting room when I'm dealing with clients or groups. You know, they'll tell me terrible things that have happened to them either in the past or in the present. And I'm there to validate and normalize that, let them know that, yes, that is tough. How can we work forward with it? And let them know that what's happened is a very normal thing. So, you know, tragedies and trauma are normal, but also moving forward is also very normal. It's a very human condition to be able to move forward. And in fact, even after a traumatic event, some people emerge with what we call post-traumatic growth. It doesn't just always have to be post-traumatic stress. So they come out better rather than bitter.
Mate, that is awesome. And look, I'm already going off because I do, and you know, a lot of people knock me and go, Maloney, do you have a structure for your interviews? Do you really? And I promise you, I do. I'm going to go a little bit off. This is an unscripted question that we're pretty much going to hit into. I'm very interested in mental health, and I'd like your take. I think that's a really, really healthy way of doing things. We've really got to be careful about over medicalization. Now we know it's true in mainstream health, like, you know, we're getting issues with the use, issues with the overuse of stuff like penicillin. So you know, the idea that we got to be careful. I don't know why it's never. I don't know. You know, this idea that we've got to be really careful with medicalizing the human brain, which is really, really complex, arguably the most complex thing in the known universe. And we really don't know a lot about it, really, when it comes right down to it. And I'd like your comment on this statement. It's something that it's a suspicion that I've had brewing in my mind for some years. We don't really know what mental health is and what mental illness is in the truest sense of the word, because it's not as, like with some things you can have a pathology. So like if someone gets a bullet to their brain or some sort of big trauma, it's like, yeah, that's easily diagnosable. And if someone has misused substances or they got fetal alcohol syndrome, yeah, we can kind of measure that, no problem. But this idea that a certain behavior is mentally ill, really, I think it's Dr. Thomas Satz. I never pronounce his surname. Yeah.
Big fan of his.
He basically kind of says, look, it's what we say we don't like is mentally ill. You know, it's because that's about behavior. Like sometimes you can link it with something physical, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes, you know, sometimes people, you know, and what makes mental illness? So could you kind of answer that? Like how do we define and categorize mental illness?
Yeah, look, when I read from, in addition to SAS, there's plenty of others. For example, there's a fellow called, what is book here? Oh, good book. Overdiagnosing in psychiatry by a psychiatrist. And he says that symptoms, whether they cluster together, form syndrome, you know, they form syndromes, but without a specific etiology, syndromes are not diseases. And since most mental illnesses remain syndromes, psychiatry describes it as, you know, disorder. So disorder is a better word to use. Certainly, you know, when we say illness or sickness, metaphorically, that's fine. We talk about a sick economy. That was a sick joke, that sort of thing. But to say our thinking and our mind and that is sick or diseased is, you know, very misleading. Unless you can identify an underlying pathology there, I would call it, you know, maladjusted behaviour. And the gentleman you refer to, Thomas Sass, said when you don't like the program you see on TV, you don't call a TV repairman, meaning it's not a hardware problem. And, you know, we can have a laugh, and this is not to put down people who are having struggles.
Yeah.
But what we're saying, you can be really down, doing crazy things, doesn't mean that your brain is faulty or it's broken or anything. It just means that there's a bit of work to do, there's some readjustment, learning new assumptions, and that sort of thing. And look, even having just said that, there's going to be people, jump on and say, "Oh, he can't say that," etc., etc. And look, everything I say, and we're only here for a short moment of time, but everything I can say, I can sort of pretty much back from the literature. I'm definitely not saying people don't have struggles, because I deal with them in my clinical practice, and I love dealing with them. And they keep coming back, so I'm obviously doing something right. So yeah, we just need to be careful with the language that's used. But certainly, it's interesting that you got SAS and Paris and a lot of other qualified people that are making very interesting claims about mental health.
Yeah, and look, it's a debate that needs to. I'm not scientifically trained like you, but even with my limited understanding of science, like I know that. Well, my understanding of science is that it's not a body of knowledge. So I talk to people and they talk like science is a body of knowledge that you can follow. That's not the way science works. Science is a procedure. It's a process. So someone makes a hypothesis. We think of a way it can be disproven. First, it's got to be disprovable to be a hypothesis.
Yeah.
It's tested. Then the results are handed over to other relevantly qualified people. And if they can replicate the results, then you've got a scientific outcome, and then it goes through. That's part of the peer review process.
Yeah.
And that's science. So that's the way it works. It's not a body of knowledge magically kind of out there that we can just kind of follow. That's not what's going on. A quick g'day to Chris McLaughlin Topher and Mr. Hanson. Thanks very much for tuning in, guys. It's fantastic to see you on there. But mate, we've already started waving books at people. I know that you've contributed to a recent book, so I'm going to get you to plug that. But I think we should also plug your dad's book.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I think we should.
How about we plug my father?
Sorry.
How about we give my father a plug?
Do it. Tell me all about it.
Yeah.
He's one of my heroes, eh? Like, I don't mind.
Yeah. And so, I was born in Innisfail because Dad was a young constable up there at the time. And, a lot of people who do know my father will know him for his work in the Fitzgerald inquiry. And one thing I want to say, which I don't think was mentioned in the book, not many people know, was, yes, there would have been a lot of stress and pressure at that time with corruption and that sort of thing. One thing I can honestly say, I cannot remember once ever my father coming home stressed from work, or at least showing that stress to the family. He'd come home and he was Dad. He stepped into the role of Dad, and that's what he did when he was at home. All the other stuff, he and Mum probably had conversations, but he did not reveal it to my sister and I. And so that, I give him real credit. I think that was amazing to not let it upset his family life, because he was first and foremost, and still is, a family man.
And look, it's true. We do think of him as the hero of the Fitzgerald inquiry, and well, we should. He's like Queensland Serpico, and that bottle of scotch that he handed over is now, it's actually on display. I think it's in the CMC, and I've got a couple of well, he's not a full-on mate because he's so highly ranked, but like a chief superintendent who I was quite friendly with took a photograph of it. And he came running in one day after you came there and goes, "Oh, Matt, I got this photograph of that's the thing." And mate, he was. I can tell you that a lot of the coppers were thrilled to have you up here. And of course, I know the police liaison officers, they still talk about your visit here. So big g'day to Tony Barney and any of the PLOs, Mayliz, and all my other friends up there. So it's I've got Dr. Dillion back. But look,
I'm wanting to come back up. I'd love to come back up to Cairns.
Well, mate, if I can find a way, I'll get you back up. I'm going to go right off on a tangent now. You're an amateur magician. What do you like about magic?
Oh.
Like, what's a good psychologist like you doing, playing around with magic?
Well, I guess I can use it a little bit in psychology practice. It's, people are entertained by it when it's done properly. It's a bit of fun. Certainly if I do some work at a hospital and I've got a group there and I want to illustrate a good point, I might just weave in a bit of magic to get their attention and use it as a metaphor, that sort of thing. So yeah, why not?
That's great. That is great. And I've actually, I've got to declare an interest here. Anthony's come around for dinner one night, and he did magic tricks for the kids, and they absolutely loved it. So, look, mates. Okay, I suppose we should get into some of the Indigenous issues here. Actually, first I'm going to plug your website. So here is Anthony's website. It's called Australians at the Crossroads.
Or at the Crossroads.
Yep. So there's Anthony's website there. And
it's got a short little video there.
Let's start talking about some of those issues. Sorry, there's just a little boy who came running into my room who I can't murder because this is going live. But look, all right, mate. Okay, everyone recognises that colonisation certainly did have some really serious negative effects on Indigenous Australia. No one denies that. But as you've already indicated, you're against the victimhood narrative, and from what I've ascertained, a lot of that has got to do with your psychological training because it's kind of counterproductive. But look, let's steel man. What part of the victimhood narrative, what part of the narrative has truth? Like, we do know that there were undoubtedly there was some slaughters, there was some a lot of those really, really terrible things happened, and people were dispossessed from their land, and those things happen. No sane human being denies it. So what do you validate, and where do you see distortions and exaggerations?
Okay, well, similar to what I say to clients in my practice, whether they be Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal, they may tell me about some horrific event they've personally experienced. Never mind something that their great-great-great-grandfather may have experienced, but even when they've personally experienced something, and after I get to know them, just within a couple of minutes, and I've developed that good rapport, I will let them know. I say, look, I want to suggest to you, we are never ever victims of our past, but only ever victims of our view of the past. And I have not had one person say to me, oh, I disagree with that. That's terrible. So it is a message, once it's given to them, they do find it satisfying and helpful. That they do not have to be a victim of the past. That is, that they are only a victim of their view of the past, as indeed many, many thousands of Indigenous Australians have shown, and indeed people from other races as well. And I then suggest to the people, we cannot change the past. We can change our view of the past by changing our view of ourselves in the present. So I put it to them, what do you want to do? Do you want the past to be a stumbling block, or do you want it to be a stepping stone to a better future? And every person I've ever said that to, they said, I want it to be a stepping stone to a better future. And so then that's what we work with.
Wow. Okay, so again, I'm going to go off on a bit of an unscripted question here. So with all the terrible trauma that happened, and it wasn't just I think we do focus, my take on this issue is, those terrible things happened, but I think we focus a little bit too much on that to the point where it's kind of unhealthy and counterproductive, because there was some really beautiful things that happened in colonial history. And actually, I shone a bit of a light on that when I organised the 150th in Cohen. Like the great Barry Port, who unfortunately is no longer with us, was a long-standing law enforcement officer, proud of his Indigenous heritage and proud of being a law enforcement officer, saw no contradiction, and he saved lives through his tracking skills. Won awards for that sort of stuff. And I think we kind of forget that little bit of history. The question I want to kind of lead on to is, can the terrible things that have happened be used for post-traumatic growth? This thing that you were talking about before, like, is there a bright future for Australia, or are we or are we kind of like defined and damned by the negative parts of colonial history?
No, well, certainly on an individual level, if individuals hear the message and want to make a difference in their lives, and I'm, as far as Aboriginal people who have made positive differences, I'm just lucky that I come from a family of them. So I've got my father, grandparents, and uncle and aunts to look at, who have always, just been shining role models for me. On a population national basis, it's going to be hard because, not only in the popular media, and you could kind of excuse it in, when you've got people like SBS and ABC, with their trashy narrative that they push out, that Aboriginal people are endless victims of racism and transgenerational trauma. Not only do you have that, but you've even got more, what you would think were better, more enlightened bodies, such as government departments and academia, also pushing out a bit of garbage, that love to promote the view that Indigenous people are constantly victims of racism and genocide and transgenerational trauma and the white man and that sort of thing. So, look, it's hard to go against, but if we can do it person by person, and opportunities like this are really great to give my message. When you've got other people like Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine, and before Jacinta, her mother, was bravely putting the message out there that, hey, there's violence in our communities and we've got to stop making excuses. So when we've got individuals like that out there giving the good message, it's slowly turning things around, but there's still a lot of work to do, and it's really hard when you go against popular media, and also academic institutions.
Well, you've touched on a really interesting question. Actually, there was a number of questions that immediately jumped into my mind there, but we'll go from the top. You wrote an article that was published in the Herald Sun, I think, just recently, that touched pretty much on all these issues, mate. Because we're coming up to the 30th anniversary of the handing down of the findings of deaths in custody, which affected the way that I did my duties in the early 90s. But you've also discussed about the persistence of this narrative, which you can't say is completely false. Again, like, no one is claiming that there wasn't. I don't see you, from what I've done of the readings of you. You're not some sort of Holocaust denier. Like that's just simply not the case. And anyone who tries to, no, but there is that hint. I've kind of seen that on some of the more radical websites because I read this stuff. That has been hinted at, Anthony. That's not the case with you. No one is kind of denying that. For you, it does appear to be about moving in the positive. But how pervasive is this? Is this narrative in the media? In academia, and what happens to people if they counter it, or they come out to, or they, are the facts, I suppose, being distorted by the media, by the academia? Sorry, not the media.
Yes. Yep. Certainly. I've had occasions before. I've been in academia for 10 years. And certainly, if I've been sitting there with an academic colleague and they make a statement, about the rampant racism or whatever, it's just easier for me to shut up. It's just not worth saying anything. And however, having said that, when I lecture to students, which I, do once or twice a year, which I love, and I'll say some of these things, and I'll give deaths in custody as a classic example, everyone's always amazed, because I'll say to them, what does this, we hear a lot about these Aboriginal deaths in custody, what does that mean? And they say, oh, it means that Aboriginal people are overrepresented in deaths in custody. And then I give them these statistics, and they're quite surprised. In fact, I was once like them. I just assumed, because I'd heard it so many times, that Aboriginal people were overrepresented in deaths in custody. And then I read a book by Gary Johns, White Man Streaming, and he just pointed out the facts. And he went to the original sources and said, the data has always shown Aboriginal people in custody do not die at higher rates than non-Aboriginal people in custody. And so then I was able to confidently, because I had a look at the original findings myself, I was then able to confidently talk about it. Having said that, it's still a voice that's squeezed out. Again, you go to ABC, SBS, NITV, and they'll just say, another death in custody. The genocide continues. When will this end? They'll talk about, despite all the recommendations in the Royal Commission, blah, 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 blah. And they always just leave out that detail. However, once in custody, an Aboriginal person is less likely to die than a non-Aboriginal person in custody. Very important detail they leave out.
Yeah, well, it's because, you know, this is something that I, obviously as a very soon to be former law enforcement officer, you know, I was really kind of concerned about it. Like, first, I didn't join an organisation that I thought would be comparable to the Gestapo. But having said that, like, I mean, if the stats were there, like if it was like, oh my God, I didn't know, and I looked at it, like I would have quit. I didn't spend 30 years in the Queensland Police Service, waking up every morning wondering how I was going to oppress Indigenous people. It simply didn't happen. And it's not to say that that the Queensland Police Service doesn't have its, and sorry for saying this, guys, you know, doesn't have its fair shares of idiots. And there are some racists in the Queensland Police Service. I'm sure of it. But I can tell you, after, you know, being a 30-year veteran, that it's unacceptable kind of culturally to, you know, pick on Indigenous people. In fact, you'll get yourself in trouble, because like we see ourselves as protectors of the weak. That's the kind of cop mentality. And then when I saw people going into this narrative, especially with the Black Lives Matter protests, like when I heard Black Lives Matter were coming to Australia, and you may laugh at this, I was actually, yes, this is going to be a good thing. Black Lives Matter, because when I was in Arakan, like I was aware from personal, first it just started off as personal experience. Like I knew of the disproportionate murder rates, and I can, while you're talking, I might even pull up some of the stats because I've got them pretty quickly. I got them pretty quickly, and it's about, I think it's about, and I might stand corrected on this, but for every for the 10 deaths in custody since the handing down of the findings that have been caused by direct police action, and by that I mean, so someone has been shot, someone has been headlocked and they've died. There's been they've died as a result of a direct police action. There's been 10 people since 1991, I believe. I think since that time there has been, I think it's something like 900 murders of Indigenous violence. So in my mind, it's not that, and of course the dynamic with the police is a bit different, because a police officer is there to protect people. People genuinely outraged when they kind of see, well, you're kind of counterproductive. You killed that guy, and your job is to protect life and property. I get the outrage. It's akin to the outrage with the abuse of moral trust and authority in the church, which kind of like happened as well. Totally understand that. But the real threat to, you know, I joined the police. I went up to Arakan. I went to these places and served proudly to the Torres Strait Islands, learn a lot. I did it to serve. And I know that almost all, you know, well, not almost, all of my colleagues did the same sort of thing. Some were motivated by money, because you do get a little bit of extra money by going up there. So there were mercenaries. I won't. And there were just a couple of misfits as well. I might even fall in that category. But, you know, this pervasive narrative is really, really counterproductive. And I can't help but think, in that recent terrible tragedy that over in Western Australia, where those young chaps were trying to escape the police and drowned, I can't help but think that perhaps this narrative might actually contribute to that. Like if someone is, you know, like,
I mean, we can't be 100% certain, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did, when you've got prominent people, you know, one of which I referred to in the article, giving this narrative. It's not helpful at all. Tell the truth. That, you know, if you're an Aboriginal person or a non-Aboriginal person, you're near a police officer, generally speaking, unless you're doing something wrong, you don't have a problem.
it's kind of simple. But you also quote in the article a chap, David Biles, a criminologist.
Yeah.
Mate, tell me about that, because that's got some pretty interesting implications.
Yes. So he's the guy who headed up the Royal Commission, and you know, it's publicly available. Everything he says. There's article in the Canberra Times for there to people to read. I talk about it there, and it's just, you know, just says from day one they knew the truth, and he said they were, you know, to suggest that Aboriginal people were not more likely to die. In fact, slightly less likely to die than non-Aboriginal person in prison. They were accused of being disloyal to the Royal Commission. So,
Wow.
you can imagine the sort of pressure they're under to give a particular narrative.
Well, I mean, that is mind-blowing. Like, we're no longer talking about a couple of first-year philosophy students after heading to the Green Left, after reading the Green Left Weekly, sitting around slurping some passion pop and solving the world's problems. We're talking about people who really are writing, not just shaping, who are writing the national narrative, and who fundamentally are kind of accusing Australia really of genocide, crime against humanity, on a narrative that's just not true. And it's they know. Yeah. Okay, I think some people are doing this out of fear. It's like, man, I'll lose my job. I kind of get that. It's a difficult thing to disclose something that goes to counter to a narrative. I can tell you, being in a major incident room, like if there's a big investigation going, there's a major incident room and everyone has a big scrum down, you'll get guys writing on the board and all that. And any investigation is fundamentally like, yes, you're gathering facts, but actually what it's about is forming a narrative. An investigation is about writing a narrative. It's like, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And if you find a fact that goes counter to the narrative, and the narrative has started gathering steam, and you go, guys, there's an anomaly over here. Kind of doesn't fit. Maybe we're not going on the wrong path. Maybe we're not going on the right path, because you get this inertia when you get an investigation and stuff going like that. And it concerns me, and it's going to result, like if it was just about virtue signaling and no one got hurt, I'd go, well, who kind of cares? But people are getting hurt. Like, people are suffering as a result of this. And look, do you think people are actually suffering from psychological trauma as well? Like, do you think that would impact on any of that?
Like, what psychological trauma are you talking about?
So, like, Ernest Hunter writes a lot about intergenerational trauma. I kind of think that's true. But if someone is constantly told that you're a victim, you're a victim, you're a victim, there's nothing you can do, you're a victim, you're a victim, you're a victim, that would impact on me psychologically. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
sense of power.
I agree 100%. Unless that person becomes enlightened or someone else helps them, it's very tempting to fall into the victim mentality of, what the heck, I can't win. The deck stacked against me. Racism is everywhere. Whatever. If you're told that repeatedly, and so it does, become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Aussie sociologist Hugh Mackay said, the observations we make in life tend to confirm the perspective from which they were made. So once you buy into the I'm a victim, you have no trouble seeing perpetrators. And for Aboriginal people, if they've bought into that victimhood narrative, well, then anyone who is white becomes a perpetrator or a potential perpetrator.
That's right.
It's a classic bias. You were talking about the narrative before, where you said you were, you're doing an investigation or whatever. There's a psychologist, George Elby, and he talks about it's, we like to think that we gather facts and draw conclusions. He said the opposite's more true. We draw conclusions and then gather facts to support those conclusions. So we start off with the end in mind, and we just filter out what we don't want to hear or see. I think Einstein summed it up quite well. He said the ears won't hear what the heart can't accept. So if there's counter evidence, your agenda, the mind can very easily screen it out.
Yeah.
Mate, also, Matt, if I can just interrupt, that article in the Canberra Times by David Biles, I've got it open. Am I able to share you the link or something?
Yes, please. Share away, brother.
Just share the screen, shall I?
Just share it.
Yeah. Let me see if we can do this. Where is share screen?
Square down the bottom.
Can't see it. I can't see. Oh, sorry. Oh, yes. Okay. Let me try and get this up.
Hey, while you're doing that,
Yeah.
I'll read out a couple of these. I'll read it because I found my stats and I'm going to read them out. Okay, so we've heard the number 432 thrown up a bit, and I do apologise. I do apologise for reading straight off this. There have been 432 Indigenous deaths in custody since 1991. Of the 432 deaths, and the source is the Australian Bureau of Stats, of the 432 deaths, only 146 were in police custody. The rest were in prison, and therefore in the custody of prison officers, not police. Of the 146 deaths in police custody, 39 were actually motor vehicle crashes as a result of police pursuits. Queensland has a limited pursuit policy for some years, and the police kind of like very rarely pursue. Out of the under 107 deaths, 31 were from natural causes, 28 were from suicide, 38 due to accidents and misadventure. That leaves 10 deaths since 1991 in nearly 30 years that have actually been what could be categorised as homicide relating to police action. So again, that's someone being shot, someone being headlocked, you know, the unfortunate incident in Palm Island with Chris Hurley. Now, when you compare that to Indigenous homicide rates, now there's a really good paper that I dug up by Tracy Cusson and Willow Bryant, published in the Australian Institute of Criminology. Now, this was published in 2015, so the period covers July 1989 to June 2012. So it's not a perfect fit, but it's pretty indicative. Now, while murder rates have generally dropped since the publication of this paper, in the 23-year period, there were 1,096 homicide incidents involving at least one Indigenous person, with 951 Indigenous victims and 1,234 Indigenous offenders. The total number of victims and offenders is greater than the total number of incidents, because some incidents involve more than one offender or deal with more than one victim. So, you know, you got your murder suicides or whatever it is. Now, when you look at the paper, you'll notice that about 16% of all homicide offenders are Indigenous. That's disproportionately high, but interestingly, it's comparable to the proportion of Indigenous people in prison, which is round about 16%. So the narrative, and I'm going to come out and just say this, the narrative that police officers are murdering Indigenous people is just false. It's false. It's just, it's not true. And let's just say that all of those deaths, so that's rather than the 10, and incidentally, no police officer in that time, despite being tried, has ever been found guilty of any sort of manslaughter. Let's say there's 107 deaths. It was actually a massive conspiracy, and those 107 people were all murdered by the police. It's this massive conspiracy. Let's say that that's the case, and obviously it's not true. I'm just saying this for the purposes of comparison. 107 versus 1,096. Like, that would be a factor of 10, even if that false narrative was true. But yeah, go on, Anthony.
Yeah, and look, you've spoken about the other side, you know, the black on black, and Black Lives Matter don't want to know about that. You know, it seems that I think I said this in the article today. Black lives only matter when there's a white perpetrator, and we know that Aboriginal people are far more likely to be hurt by other Aboriginal people. So if we want to make a difference in the lives of Aboriginal people, if we want to improve quality of life, length of life, we got to stop this harm that they receive from each other. And, you know, we could talk about that, and very briefly, we got to get kids into school, adults into jobs, makes communities safer. You know, the sorts of things which it's not rocket science.
See, I was genuinely happy when BLN came to Australia, and finally, yes, they're going to shine a light on. We're going to start talking about Indigenous homicide rates in Cape York. You know, I went to 3 murders in 3 weeks in Arakan, and which for a population of, you know, 1,200 people, like, do the math. That's huge. But all right, so mate, give us a quick rundown of David Biles's article, and then I'm going to hit you with some more questions.
Okay, well, look, there it is. You know, people can, maybe you can make the link available to, or I'll put it on the Facebook page or something there.
Mm-hmm.
But there's David Biles, very credible man. And by the way, the other source people should refer to is Arresting Incarceration by Don Weatherburn. Okay, so that's also a very good one. And Biles just goes through go through it here. You know, we were even accused of disloyalty to the Royal Commission I spoke about. So it's a 2-minute read, and it's sort of like my go-to article when you know, people start talking about Aboriginal people being slaughtered. Now, the other issue which people conflate, which kind of muddies the waters, is yes, they are overrepresented in custody. In custody, the numbers are greater. You know, 30% compared to 3% of the population. Nobody disagrees with that, and that is a national disgrace, and everyone wants that to be better. But that should not be conflated with death rates to create this narrative of police and prison guards are killing Aboriginal people.
Yeah, it's just a lie. It's a flat out lie. It's a lie so big that's, you know, that Molotov would have. I don't know. I don't know. We should tell that one. It's a little bit big. But look,
Damaging lie.
You've also written an excellent essay in the Dissenters Project. I'm going to quote from it. I grew up in a suburban home in Brisbane with an English/Australian mother and an Aboriginal father. Both parents had extended families that loved me and shaped me into the person that I am today. I was neither raised as an Aboriginal person or a non-Aboriginal person. I was raised as Anthony. And I love that. Look, I think identity politics is really, really terrible. But by the same token, I get the idea of wanting to be proud of your heritage and who you are and where you're from. Like, a person disassociated from their history isn't a full person. Anthony, is there a way that that people, including Indigenous people, can be proud of who they are and where they've come from without falling into the trap of racist identity politics? And this,
sure, there's a difference between being proud of who you are or one branch of the family tree. And let's face it, for many Aboriginal people today, they often have multiple ancestries. Nothing wrong with that, and no surprise which one they cling to most tightly. And if they want to be proud of that one, that's fine. They can be proud of it. But there's a difference between being proud of that and building your identity around that. And as you just read out in that Dissenters Project book, yeah, I'm just Anthony. And certainly when I'm at a function, even an academic function, or if I'm on a government committee or something, and there's a lot of people there, and we have to introduce ourselves, I never ever come out and say, "I'm Anthony. I'm a proud Kumba Merry man." I'm just Anthony. Okay. And I think for people, if they want to get to know me, that is the best way to get to know me, that I'm Anthony, because it just lets them know I'm just like them as well. So it's not, I've got some Aboriginal ancestry, so that makes me totally separate to you. No, I'm just Anthony. I'm just like you. I'm connected with you. And for my, Aboriginal brothers and sisters who want to talk about their, I'm a Wiradjuri man or whatever, that's fine if they want to do that. Doesn't change how I see you. But I'm Anthony. So, there's just this danger when you split the world up into Aboriginal, not Aboriginal. You've got an us and a them. And, I often quote the good book, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." And I think we are seeing that. We're seeing this divided house of us and them. And, if there's any good news in all of this, perhaps I should say that I don't think it's every Aboriginal person doing this. I think it's a minority, the loud voices, because like you, Matt, I've been to many Aboriginal communities, and they're fun people. They just introduce themselves as, I'm Ted, I'm Mac, they don't build their identity around being Aboriginal. So yes, it's a minority who I think like to push the identity politics. Thank goodness most Aboriginal people are just like most non-Aboriginal people, where they just they recognise that they're people first, Aboriginal second.
Yeah, and really that's it, because when it comes down to these, I suppose determinants is the wrong word, but these identity markers, like I'm pretty sure that if you came down to 6, you would already get to being an individual. So like, you'd be, for me, for example, so if you're going to pick race, well, how many people, because I'll go back to my grandparents, Irish, Scots, Polish, Mongolian. How many people in the world like that? There'd be a few, but not many. Okay. How many who are of them are Christian? Smaller. How many of them are born in Australia? Smaller. How many of them were, speak English first? Smaller. How many of them were adopted? Smaller. How many, this. By the time you've got to 6, there's only one person that's going to be like that. That's Matt Maloney. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's going to be no one else in the world like that with only 6 of those identity markers. So in my mind, that's why it's so silly and pointless, because the best way of dealing with people is Anthony and Matt, not identity marker talking to identity marker. And then you're not even really talking to a person. Like, you're no longer talking to a person. You're talking to, even an identity is wrong. Like, you can't have, collective identities can't talk to each other. Only people can.
Exactly. And look, going back to that, you quoted the Dissenters book before, which I had a chapter in, and I made the comment there. There was a physicist, David Bohm, a leading physicist, and he come to the conclusion that much of the world's problems stem from the perception that we are separate from one another. Okay? And of course, we live in different bodies and that sort of thing, but he means on a spiritual level, we're connected, we're not separate. And I think as soon as you put that label, whether it be Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, whatever, you're separating yourself from others, and I don't think it's working well.
No.
Again, be proud of your ancestry, and if you only want to be proud of one ancestry, that's fine, that's your business. But just see yourself as having more in common with the non-Aboriginal person, and what there are differences between you.
I've lived overseas in China and out of Mongolia. Were 2 places. Now, China, I love the people. So I know I've got Chinese friends, and looking at my metrics, I actually do have Chinese people who kind of tune into this. So I really sincerely, bottom of my heart, adore the Chinese people. But I have some concerns about the government. And when I was speaking to people who went through the Cultural Revolution over there, one of the things, I spoke to a girl's mother who I know, who was actually a Red Guard. And she talked about how she destroyed some of the tombs and stuff like that over there, and she regrets it to this day, because that's her. Like, it wasn't the Japanese doing it. Like, it wasn't, and that's the sort of stuff the Japs did in the Second World War. Like, they went and destroyed all these, they were out to destroy Chinese history. Well, it turns out the best destroyers of Chinese history were the Chinese. And she talked about how there was the totalitarian government at the time was trying really hard to create distrust. They were actively trying to do that. They were banning any, of course, religion was banned very, very quickly, but it wasn't just that. Like, mahjong groups, because they love the game. Mahjong, the game? With all the tiles and there's this game called mahjong. It's magnificent. The Chinese love it. They would ban stuff like that, where people could get together for non-political reasons, talk, trust, and get to know each other. That was a threat to the regime. That's a threat. When you're putting identity, when you invest your identity in the state and in these other identity markers, and you come and do these things, Matt and Anthony getting together for a mahjong game is a threat to the state. Like, where are we going? Like, do we want this? Like, seriously. But look, this is flying past, and I really want to talk to, I love this topic.
Matt, can I just say one more? Can I say one more thing about identity politics?
Of course.
When you build your identity around, whether it be you're a male, you're gay, or you're Catholic, or Christian, or whatever, the problem is, if your sense of identity and sense of self-worth is built upon that, you then have a problem when you hear something bad about that. So, for example, yes, I'm a proud Queenslander, but I do not build my sense of self-worth on being a Queenslander. So therefore, if I hear something negative about Queensland, like, let's suppose, hypothetically, I heard that it had the highest murder rate in the country or whatever, I'm then not embarrassed or anything. I don't think, oh God, this is terrible if people find out I'm from Queensland or whatever. That doesn't worry me, because I do not build my sense of self-worth on being Queenslander. Same with Aboriginal. And far too many people who build their sense of identity and self-worth on being Aboriginal are then too afraid to hear bad statistics, bad things. They don't want to know about it. It comes back to that Einstein quote before I said, the ears won't hear what the heart can't accept. So for me, if I hear that there's a problem, shockingly high rates of violence or child sexual abuse or whatever, I don't run away from it. I'm happy to tackle it and discuss it. There's no use sticking your head in the sand. And if that's what one of the big problems with identity politics is. You don't want to hear anything bad about the identity you've built for yourself. That's all I want to say.
And look, that's true. And I'm going to quickly validate that before we move on. But being in the police, we really are. We've got our own little subculture, and our identity is linked up with the police, whether you like it or not. And that ends up happening even if you actively fight it, because you go to a party, it's like, oh, here's the police. And it kind of starts to, and you start to take on that persona. And criticism of the police quickly becomes criticism of you. And when I interviewed Brian Cassie, who's one of a fantastic photographer who I was lucky enough to have on, great interview, by the way. If anyone is watching that, jump onto Brian's interview as well. It's definitely worth a watch. He covered the Black Lives Matter protest here. And look, he has this photograph of this African-American lady who got really upset because, she has a deep empathy with African-American people who are, and the stuff that's happening over there, because she is one. And she is this photograph of her lying on the ground with her hands on the back that Brian has taken, and her crying because she's really upset about it. She's getting right into the moment. Now, when Brian kind of showed that, of course, it's a confronting image to anyone. But if you're in the police, and I know, because there's a chance that Brian will watch this. Brian, I know you weren't trying to humiliate me or make me feel bad or anything. But of course, for that second, people are like, well, you're in the police. How do you feel about that? And I go, there's a guy in Minnesota. Like, I don't know him. And yes, I'm a proud police officer. And yes, I was proud to serve for 30 years. But that wasn't me. My identity's not linked up with that. And I think that guy should be held to account. Like, I don't think he should be let off or anything like that, simply because he wore a blue uniform. In fact, if anything, that should be like man, you're going to do a little bit more time as a result of that, assuming that he gets found guilty, without wanting to presuppose that. But look, tell me about your one of your interests is ADHD. Can we talk about that?
Okay, yeah. And yep, sure. A little bit general, not going to get too specific, but look, we live in a world where it was very different to when I was a boy. And when you were a boy, I've seen a breakdown of the family unit. There's more desire for instant gratification and that sort of thing. When I was a kid, you'd make stuff, you'd do stuff, you'd entertain yourself. If you said you're bored, parents would say, well, then do something, that sort of thing. And we now live in an age where I want it now. Often there's only one parent in the home. So we've got all these different factors converging where kids really do have it tough these days. In some ways they've got it better, but in a lot of ways they've got it more difficult. So it's not surprising that we see a rise in this thing, what we call ADHD, which, like so many mental health labels or diagnoses, if you want to call them, are that they're just labels, essentially labels. And I'm not saying there's no value in a label, but it describes kids that are can be fidgety or daydreaming or whatever. So that's not to say that that's not a problem. But again, coming back to what we said at the beginning of this session, you don't want to pathologize and medicalize every aberrant behavior. And so, yes, I really feel for the parents where they have a kid who has that label, because it can be very, very challenging. Not all the time, but often it is very challenging. And some parents are, at their wits' end. So that's what I would say by way of introduction of it. I just add
what works.
Certainly, as a kid, I would have met the criteria easily. I was a little horror.
Yeah, me too. Still. Yeah. Yeah, no question about it. I would have, and that's one of the things that concerns the hell out of me. Okay, so what would you suggest for, again, I don't know if treatment is perhaps the right word, but what's the way forward with this epidemic of ADHD, and what do we do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, accept that, if you're a parent and your kid does exhibit those characteristics, behaviors, that, all kids are different, and, some are a little bit more this way, some are a little bit more that way. And so if it's a difference, if it's a minor difference, don't worry about it. But if it gets to a degree where it's disruptive to the home, school, whatever, the child's not learning, well, then seek professional help. See a psychologist or someone, and just say you have some concerns. I wouldn't make medication the first step, nor would I tell parents not to do it, but I would just say, consider other options first, because often, kids, if they struggle at school, well, then it's not surprising that they're going to play out. So maybe it's a problem with learning at school. Maybe they need some extra tuition or something. But see the kid as a whole kid, first of all, and then take it from there. But, I do feel for those extreme cases where the parents have got a handful and it's really hard to take charge. I guess the other thing, having said that, I think parenting these days is a bit different to what it was when we were a kid. And I saw a delightful interview with Steve Harvey the other day, the American talk show host, Steve Harvey. He just rhetorically asked, when did we start negotiating with our kids? And the point he was trying to make is, today there seems to be a lot of negotiation with the kids. Do you like this? Are you happy with that? Do you want to do it, another way? Blah, 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 blah. Whereas back, when I was a kid, it was quite clear who the boss was, the parents. And the other thing too, back when I was a kid, school teachers had authority.
Yeah.
Okay? And if one of my teachers told my parents that I had misbehaved, boy, it was all over. I was in trouble.
Yeah.
There was no negotiation. I wouldn't even try lying to say that the teacher got it wrong, because my parents just had the trust of the teacher. These days, where you got parents, the teachers have been stripped of authority. So they've been stripped of authority, but overloaded with more responsibility. So out goes the authority, in comes the more responsibility. Teachers are having to be counsellor, nurse, parent, teaching them hygiene lessons, all that sort of thing. So, when you've got all those factors combined together, it's no problem. It's no surprise that we're seeing a major problem.
Mm. And look, I'm sorry, I'm going to squeeze one more question in, because I had the people concerned about medication. They were one of some of the people that I interviewed last week, actually, and I got to say that was a really interesting interview. So a big g'day to Mr. Rowe, who I know is watching. Fantastic to see you there. And one of the things that they were talking about was diet. Like, do you know any of the literature on diet affecting this sort of stuff?
Yeah, sure. And I've heard some miracle stories before where they've made some changes and they've seen, radical improvement. And to that, I would say, if that's the case, well, then the diagnosis ceases then to be ADHD. It's then more food allergy or whatever, if you can find an alternate explanation for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, if food or a food additive or whatever is the cause or major contributor, well, then that then becomes the explanation for it. I'll just give you one more quote from that psychiatrist, Joel Paris. He said, "We sometimes forget that mental disorders are convenient labels that lack any ultimate degree of reality." Now, that's not to say that the behavior the person's exhibiting is real. It certainly is real, but the label we apply to it is less real, if that makes sense. It does. A convenient descriptor, and it certainly has a place. I'm not saying we should get rid of it. I'm just saying we shouldn't infuse it with too much life. We shouldn't reify it.
Yeah, again, that's SATS, and do forgive my terrible pronunciation of the Hungarian psychologist. Is it SATS?
Psychiatrist.
So yeah, psychiatrist. Yeah, but Thomas, sorry?
Yeah, Sass, as far as I know, Thomas Sass.
Yeah. Fundamentally, and I'm paraphrasing his argument as I understand it, he kind of made the observation, he goes, look, stuff like murder, infanticide, and like he listed, homosexuality, he listed, he goes, even pedophilia, stuff like that. He goes, all this is part of what human beings do.
Yeah.
Now, some of it we look at and go, that's really bad. Oh, it's we pathologize it to use the term. But you can't say that it's abhorrent human behavior because it's a circular argument. If humans engage in the behavior, it's human behavior.
Yes.
It's just a label that we kind of stick on it.
Yeah. And in fact, I remember I had a friend who just went nuts. Once there was, one of those horrific crimes that we don't like for good reason. And I was saying that's what normal people can do. And I wasn't equating normal with good. I'm just saying a person doesn't have to have a broken brain to go out and rob banks. They can still engage in immoral behavior. They're still normal people and they need to be held accountable.
That's one of the things that being in the police, I discussed this in my interview with Jessica Lynn, which was, again, look, am I plugging the interviews? Yes. But the other thing is, it kind of, I've learned, seriously, Anthony, I have learned so much through talking to people, through these interviews. It really has expanded. Like, I'm relatively well-read chap, as you know, but just talking to these really interesting, informed people it's been a paradigm shift for me sometimes. And the other thing is you start to understand things about yourself. But like one thing that being in the police taught me, and it's something that I'm both scared of and grateful for, is that I'm a bit of a monster. Like I have the capacity to, I have the real capacity to, do some really, like, man, if I had my way, there's some things I'd do to some people, and I know I'd enjoy it. Like that,
that's human.
That doesn't make me an insane person. It makes me aware of my shadow.
One of my very favorite psychology books, one of my favorite mainstream psychology books. I was more into, less well-known psychology books. But one of the mainstream ones was a book called The Social Animal by Elliot Aronson. Really good book. Full of research, it's very easy to read. Anyway, he asked the question, what sort of person becomes a terrorist? And his answer was just a normal person. So it comes back to what I was saying before, just a normal person becomes a terrorist. They don't wake up one day and suddenly they're a terrorist, but they step by step, they become a terrorist. And each step justifies the next step. Does that make sense?
Totally.
And each step makes the next step easier. So it doesn't just happen overnight, but a series of steps. And, the slippery slope we hear about. And that's why all of us have got to be careful. We can very easily slip off into doing something silly and stupid and dangerous. And so it's good to, keep a check on ourselves and keep a check on our friends and stick with friends who will say to you, hey, don't you think you're getting a little bit out of hand there? Don't you think you're taking that a bit too far? So it's good just to be pulled back into line by friends and pull our friends back into line.
Yeah, it's the circular nature between socialization. Like, it's so important to surround yourself with the right people. Like if before, as we were discussing, so let's say you're an Indigenous person and you're surrounded, the white people genuinely are racist. You're watching nothing but the ABC and NITV, and there's a couple of people around you who feed into that victimhood narrative. Like you're going to go that way. Whereas if you surround yourself with positive people who will kind of call out bad behaviour, it becomes good. Look, it's one of the things that, because I watch a lot of World War II documentaries, and of course there is always this focus on Hitler, and I always get really, really concerned. It's like this dismissive. Oh, he was a madman. He was this. But you kind of look at it and go, no, he wasn't. In the First World War, he was phenomenally brave. He won the Iron Cross First Class, which is a decoration normally reserved for officers. He did incredibly brave things, risking his backside in the First World War. A lot of the strategies that won that won a lot of the battles in the Second World War, he went against the advice of his general, and they were won as a result of him. Some of the economic stuff and I despise socialism. He was a National Socialist, but like it did have sometimes, look, and I'm not, Keynesian economics is bad, okay? In the long term, it's like taking steroids. You get a little boost and it's good, but then it's like really, really bad for your body in the end, okay? I'm not advocating Keynesian economics. I'm not advocating socialism. But when you're really, really kind of low and things are really, really bad, you can see that, you know, these little stimulus things might have that effect. He introduced all of that. Now, for complete clarity, I'm sure I don't need to say that. I don't like Adolf Hitler, okay? I'll say it again in case anyone, Adolf Hitler, bad guy. Can we all agree on that? But to simply categorize him as this one-dimensional mad person, that's dangerous, because you can say, well, I'd never be that. I could never do that. And I think the most dangerous person in the world is someone who genuinely thinks they're good and can never see themselves as doing anything bad. That concerns the heck out of me so much.
Yeah. And I can see with what we've just said, someone's going to look back over this, grab 30 seconds of what you said. Maloney is a Nazi, you know. And, you know, coming back to that, and it follows on from what I said about the Elliot Aronson quote. Another great psychologist, Zimbardo, you may have heard of, you know, the Stanford prison experiments.
Oh, yeah.
Again, you know, great experiments where it showed that ordinary, average people, normal people, can end up doing bad things very easily.
Yeah.
So potential's there for all of us. But anyway, Zimbardo said the seeds of madness can be planted in anyone's backyard. So yes, you know, it can happen to any of us, which again is why it's good to choose your friends and also choose your news outlets where you get your information and news from. You know, just keep a check on it and help one another.
See, that's I think we'll finish up on this observation that the concerning thing is kind of like the academia is the eyes and ears of the country. That's where we explore ideas, and that's where we kind of if not right, at least conceive of the narratives of who we are and where we're going as a nation. And if at that level, at Royal Commission level, we got people who aren't allowed to tell the truth to a Royal Commission, that's not healthy, bro. That is not healthy, bro. But look, thanks for coming on. Mate, we're getting a fair bit of love here. So I think that we will have to get you on at some other time in the future to discuss some of this other issues. And mate, we're looking at this, there's interest over all of the issues. So very much over the Indigenous stuff, but also just on the general psychology and with the ADHD. So we'll get you on to talk about psychology. You can be our Jordan Peterson. you could be Northern Bides JP. So look, thanks very much to everyone who's out there. I've had a couple of people who've said this is a very interesting conversation, that they've enjoyed it. Thank you. Please like and share. Really need you to do that. So make sure you share it. And if you indicate in there the part of the conversation that you like the best, it's more likely to get people to watch. Do tune in next week. I've got my interviews set. I've got a number of people that I can choose from over the next 6 weeks. It's just a case of shuffling who goes in where. So I'm not going to say who it's going to be because I'm not 100,000% sure yet, but it might be Bluey O'Gorman, who was the head of the police union during the Fitzgerald inquiry. So we kind of might talk to him about that. Or it might be again. I've got a professor from a Southern university who wants to chat to me as well. So tune into Northern Vibe, like and share. We are growing. Need your help. Seriously, Vibers out there, the support you guys are giving is excellent. It's not going unnoticed or unappreciated. Thank you very much. Anthony, stay on the line, but we'll end the interview now. Thank you very much, and see you all next week.